This week, Nico Waisman, Chief Information Security Officer at Lyft, joins us to discuss vulnerability research and other things. In the security news, Windows MSI tomfoolery, curl turns 8.0, who doesn't need a 7-inch laptop, glitching the ESP, your image really isn't redacted or cropped, brute forcing pins, SSRF and light sale, reversing D-Link firmware for the win, ICMP RCE OMG, but not really, update your Pixel and Samsung, hacking ATMs in 2023, breaking down Fortinet vulnerabilities, jamming with an Arduino in 315 megahertz, analyzing your Trojans in your chips, and the we suck at math, the 4 C's of cybersecurity. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
And let me introduce you to the show. But first, a man who only wears blue gloves so he doesn't get caught red-handed, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 777, and you all have permission to listen to this episode. We're recording on March 22nd, 2023, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Mr. Larry Pesce is to my left.
How's it going?
Hey, it's going good, man.
Yeah, good to be here. It's been a good week.
Yeah.
It's been a good week.
It's been such a good week that you thought it was the weekend. I love it.
Yeah.
That's how much we love what we do. Every day is a weekend.
Yep.
Mr. Adrian Sanabria is joining us tonight. Jumping, crossing the streams.
Where am I? Am I to your right? Am I in front of you?
You're all around me. You're in front of me. You're to my left. You're also to my right. You're everywhere. Yes.
Everything everywhere all at
That's
once.
Creepy. Don't do that again with your hands. Then all I see is hands everywhere. It's very it's awesome.
You've already given me too much information.
Yes. Let's see. A quick announcement before we get started. Identiverse 2023 is heading to Las Vegas. Join the digital identity community at the Aria Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, May 30th to June 2nd. Identiverse is a must-attend annual event that brings together over 2,500 security professionals for 4 days of world-class training, engagement, and entertainment. As a community member, you will be able to receive 20% off your Identiverse 2023 tickets using the code IDV23-SW20. Register today at securityweekly.com/Identiverse 2023. Nico Waisman is currently the Chief Information Security Officer at Lyft. In his role, Waisman leads the Information Security and Privacy Program, responsible for the company's cybersecurity efforts to secure and protect personal and customer information. Nico has more than 20 years experience in the security industry, previously holding security leadership roles at GitHub, Sixterra, and Immunity. Nico is a recognized security expert and has taught governments and commercial sector students from all over the world in both private and public classroom settings, presenting some of his research at conferences such as Black Hat, PAXEC, Syscan, Echo Party, and more. Nico, welcome to the show.
Hey everyone, excited to be here. I just realized when you were reading the bio is that a lot of those conferences are not there anymore. I feel like Syscan, and I don't know if they're doing PAXEC anymore, but like those conferences are,
some
I guess I'm getting old.
Well, did we lose some of them to the pandemic, you think, or did they fade out before that?
I think that we lose a lot of conference over the pandemic. I mean, there was the first year I remember like everyone was doing online, and there was a point where like there was like a conference fatigue. I couldn't be online anymore on any conference. And I think like at the second year, we started like slowly losing a lot of conferences.
Yeah, that first year was pretty brutal. There was literally a conference, continual conference pretty much, because it was
every day of the week. It was insane.
Yep.
Nico, how did you get your start in information security?
Well, I was very young. I had a lot of free time. I was not really thinking about security as a job is more of like having fun, reading stuff online, trying to see what I was able to do. At that time, security law was a little bit ambiguous. So like there was a lot of freedom at that time. So it was mainly because like I was curious and I just want to play with systems.
What kind of?
This is why I start my journey in offensive security. Like I love the idea of like writing exploits and being able to see what exploit can do the research, write the exploit, and all of that fun.
Was it like dial-up modems that you were in the early days?
Yeah. It was definitely not BBS. Like it was. I definitely joined as the beginning of the internet time in Argentina, which was around like 97, 98, when I got my hands on US robotics. To remember that time, I was using Linux, so that was the only thing that I could actually work with Linux. There was like so many like Windows modem at that time that was like almost impossible to configure. So it took me some time to get online finally, but it was like around 97, 96 when start my security journey.
How did you?
And I mean, right away, like as soon as I connect to internet, I knew that that's what I want to do. Like I want to like do things in security.
That's awesome. How did you meet Dave Vitale and come to work at Immunity?
Yeah, so at that time, I was working by myself in a little small security company that we built in Argentina, and I was doing a lot of research in exploitation, but by myself. There was this conference in Mexico that unfortunately is not there anymore, but a lot of like really interesting people went to that conference. I don't know if you heard about Anakata, the one of the hackers behind the Pirate Bay was there. I was actually living in Mexico at that time. So they throw this like security conference that it was a little bit bizarre because they bring all these like amazing people. Dave was there, Sinan Aren, Noir, Audit Horowitz, which he has done like some such amazing work, and some other people I can really recall. And so they invite me there. I give a presentation about an exploit in Linux that allowed me to do. It was like I think it was correct. It was like a heap overflow in Linux, if I'm not wrong. And like Dave looked at my research and was like, "Who's this like random dude from Argentina?" And we start talking, and he like literally was like, "You need to work with me." And a month later, I was working at Immunity. That how it works at the time.
And you worked there for like 17 years, right?
He was being I was the third employee. So I've seen it from like a small apartment in New York where Dave was living, that was the office, to where we were at the end, which we have like around like 60 people all. We were like providing professional services to 400 to 500 companies. We have like our own conference in the Fontainebleau in Miami. That's another one that died over the pandemic. And we got acquired by this like data center company called Sixtera. Like a lot of things happened on those like these 16 years. But we have a lot of like amazing people in the team, and I generally reflect about my career sometimes, and being in like a CISO position is obviously super interesting, but I did miss the time where I was like just in my room like doing technical work.
Was it? Did you mostly find vulnerabilities and write exploits in those 17 years, or did you hold different roles?
I hold like multiple roles. I started like that for the like first like 5 to 8 years, and eventually like the company was growing, and I was in Argentina, and I know all these like amazing people that were working with me. So I started sort of like hiring those people. And there was a point where like we have like all these like random Argentinian security researchers that need someone to manage them. And there was like, well, there's nobody else there, so you have to do yourself. So eventually, I became like a manager there, and we have products. And at some point, like I was like managing some of those products. We have like Canvas, which was our Metasploit, commercial Metasploit. I think that we were like both projects were created around like the same time, and And then at the end, I was mainly focusing on professional services. Probably like 6 to 7 years, I was like focused on that because a lot of the team that I had in Argentina was mainly focused on that. So we were doing like pen testing, application security, and all of that good work.
Is there a story behind the name of El Jefe?
Well, we should pause. I just want to pause before Nico, you answer. El Jefe was what was it? A Windows? Was it a rootkit for Windows? It was
implant, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was an. What was it, Nico?
No, it was actually like sort of like the beginning of an endpoint solution. It was
EDR.
Yeah, it was like an EDR. It was not blocking, but it was like providing information about what is going on with your computer. It was probably the only like defensive project that we ever built, surprisingly. And the reason for the name is like Dave has a really bad Spanish. Like he actually came to Argentina for like 2 months to learn it, and like by the end of 2 months, he couldn't say one word. And I don't know where he heard about like jefe, which means boss in English, and he decided to name it that way. If you look at the track record of Immunity, we are terrible at like selecting names. Like Canvas is not really a good name for offensive product.
I thought it was hilarious. I loved it.
Yeah, you have the idea of like, this is a canvas where you can write your exploit and all of that. It makes sense if you explain it, but if you like hear it for the very first time, it's not really a good name.
If you have to explain it, it's not a good name. It's like if you have to explain the joke, it's not a good joke.
Right.
Exactly. We have the other wireless assessment tool that was called Silica. I mean, Silica is a great name, but again, it's not very like self-explanatory. And the bug that you mentioned was called Innuendo. That was a really cool name, though. But again,
names
not very
are
self-explanatory.
What was the debugger called? Didn't you guys have a debugger too?
Yes, Immunity Debugger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
a great name.
That was the only one.
It's a great name. You don't need to explain it.
Right? Yeah. You know, like I, for a moment, I thought like people know us from like Canvas, but I have met like so many people that have no idea what Immunity does except like that debugger.
Right.
And I wasn't really against the debugger. To be quite honest, I was like a power WinDBG user, and Immunity Debugger was based on all DBG. I know, like I'm talking history here, like half of the people will remember those names, but all DBG was like this like very graphical debugger, and we licensed the source code and we built like Python on top of the debugger, and people love it. I was a big WinDBG user, so when Dave came out with the idea of like, oh, we're going to be doing that, I was like, oh no, this is not good. Like this is, and I ended up like loving it because like I was working in some of the library implementation at that time.
It's like being a VI user and the company you work for is coming out with a product that's based on Emacs, essentially.
Pretty much.
Oof.
Nico, well, I want to welcome Mandy. Mandy joined us. Thank you for joining us, Mandy. It's nice to see you.
Hi, thank you. It's very good to be here, and nice to meet you, kind of, Nico.
Thank you.
Nico, I wanted to ask about Argentina, and because in my experience, it's always been I don't want to say hotbed. That's not, I mean, that is a term. It's not a very good one, right? But there's always been a strong population of developers and security researchers from Argentina. Do you have any insights as to why that came to be?
Yeah, this is not the first time that people have asked me that question, and this is something that we have discussed like so many times. Everyone has their own theory. There's definitely a couple of like very strong facts. First of all, there's like this is like a bigger middle class, which means that people have access to computer in the early days, which obviously help with like people developing skills at home. That's I think that's number one. Second, and especially on the like hacking industry or security industry, the Argentina in general is against government. Like we have like military government for a very long time, and it was like very bad to the population and all of that. So people generally has like this like feeling against the law, and I think that in certain ways attract security people, right? Like to break not breaking the law per se, but like challenging the status quo, which I think that like also like breed like a good generation of people that are like not just like following technology, but trying to like break that technology. And I would say the other thing is that we have a wave of like really interesting people that inspire the other generations. Like there was like an initial generation of people that were doing a lot of like viruses in the early years, and then it came out the like core generation. Like there was like 4 or 5 people that create core. That were like amazing security research, Ivan, Futo, Hera, and many others. And I think those people are the ones that inspired the next generation, with my generation. Like I was like absolutely inspired by that. And then in my generation, like people like Federico Kirschman would like put together Echo Party, and then like start building more of a security culture, to the point like now is like the biggest Latin America security conference. So we're seeing more and more generations racing from those days. So yeah, I mean, like that's my theory, but people might have a different one.
No, I think it's a good theory. I'll ask Yvonne when he comes on the show in a couple of weeks and see if his answer's different.
Ivan probably like relying with my theory, but he might have some other color to add, because like he has been around for way more time than me.
Mm-hmm. What was how was the disclosure process it changed? Actually, it's funny. Yvonne had made a comment on social media about that. How we've been doing it for so long. It was kind of detailing a recent experience, and like didn't say it was bad, good, or kind of indifferent. But how was that process changed for you? Even your first 17 years at Immunity.
Yeah, well, we didn't disclose as much vulnerabilities as Core did. I think like this is a really good question for Ivan, because he started from the early days and had seen like the progress from like different vendors. At that time, we were not focused as much on disclosure of vulnerabilities. I can talk to you about the history, but not for us. It was not as important as it was for Core that have like a really strong track record of publishing vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it seemed like Immunity had like all these packs and stuff like that for like really like weird stuff. Maybe not so popular stuff is a better term for it. I mean, you didn't develop those as Immunity. There were other people that added these packs, right? That's why I used to license Immunity, because I would go get the packs. I'm like, oh, you get an exploit for like a really weird thing that no one's expecting.
Yeah. In the early days, they were doing a lot of those like packs on top of Canvas that has like vulnerabilities for like medical devices or like SCADA devices and all of that. And we have like different like vendors that were like sort of like building plugins for Canvas at that time. Immunity used to do a lot of research and used to work with like other like government and all of that that were also like providing some like research capabilities.
Nico, where were some of your presentations focused on over the years? We'll go back in history a little bit.
Yeah. Some people at Immunity they used to say that I was like a one-trick pony, because one of the things that I would love about research and exploit development was the heap overflows. Like when I originally learned about how you can take this like underdeterministic heap, which has like multiple allocations and deallocations going on in a process. I fall in love with that idea of like, okay, how we can make this like very chaotic process have some order in a way that if I able to write like even one byte out of it, I'm going to be able to like get like full control of that process. To me, that was almost like black magic, and it started with like a group of like European hackers. I mean, one day someone needs to write a book about like the amazing European scene that we have in the late 90s. Like so many people that were doing like crazy stuff that we don't even see that level of high quality exploit these days. So I fell in love with heap exploitation, and from that point on, I started originally like doing a lot of research in Linux, and then there was I was obviously in love with Linux at that time, and then one day they was like, okay, like Linux is done, let's move to Windows. I'm like, no, why? And after like trying to find out, like I moved to Windows, and then obviously fall in love with Windows because Windows have, I mean, Linux obviously have source code, so I can go and dig into that. But Linux was way more black box to me, so I have to reverse engineer the binaries to figure out how the heap works, and most of my research has been around that. It has been more around like heap exploitation. The last two research that I present online, one of them was related with the Aurora operation, but it was mainly focused on the quality of the exploit. I took a deep dive into not the malware itself. I didn't care about that, but more about like the quality of the exploit. So I did a black hat presentation about like a use after free day use and how like that exploit was not up to par with like what we're seeing in commercial products. So I explained a little bit of like, took a deep dive into how it works and explain like that like different things that I see that was not working.
Good thing, Nico, it's a good thing we fixed that use after free problem though.
yeah. You know what? It's funny because like in all my years, especially the first like 15 to 20 years, like every 2 years, there was like a new like security mitigation that like Microsoft or Linux would came out with, and everyone was like, oh, this is the end of like exploit writing. Like we only have like 2 years left until like people start like using the mitigation and we are done with it. And then like 2 years later, nothing happened, right? Like the people would start bypassing those security control, and like it was fun because like everyone was worried about it, and then like 6 months later, like all the worries were completely over. It's getting hard. I mean, I'm pretty sure like people are writing exploit right now, like requires a level of skills, and the learning curve is like really, really steep to get into exploitation. But there's still a lot of like people interested in that. So I would say the last research was on BMCs.
Yes.
That's what we presented in 2018. Here we go. Thank you.
It's a good thing we fixed all our BMC problems too, though.
That's exciting. It was funny because when we started doing the research on BMC, we realized like feels like the 90s. Like we were reversing that firmware. Actually, I think I told you that before, but like we have a client that was like really worried about the BMC network, the out-of-band network. So they were like, "Oh, can you help me understand what is the risk that we are facing?" And so we took a deep dive and looked at like really like 4 or 5 different models of BMC from like Intel, Lenovo, IBM. Some of them are a little bit old, and we saw like looking at that firmware, and it was like they have like no mitigations at all, and the code was like really, really bad. There were like so many like vulnerabilities, and even some of them were not even vulnerabilities, just like the way the system works and how you can like easily move from BMC to host and the other way around. We were like, it was an eye opener for us. It was like, I can't believe that this is installed or is in every server that is like on the internet.
It's like a tech neverland, like where code goes that never wants to grow up.
It's like, exactly. It's like IOC is like, I guess like they're slowly getting better, but like IOC has been this like source of like really stupid vulnerabilities that feels that are nice. I think like, I don't know if it was like last year or the year before, there was like a format string bug, which we haven't seen a format string bug in a really, really long time. And like somehow it showed up on an IOC device. I was surprised about that.
But the BMCs back then also share the A-speed chipset. Was that the manufacturer? Because I know when I looked into this recently, because Eclipsium published some research on BMCs just recently, which is funny because you were doing it back in 2018, and like there's still problems today. They share a common chipset. Like most servers use A-speed SOC. And is it like ARM based? I don't remember now.
Well, like it was funny when we started doing the research. There were like multiple type of chips going on. There was some ARMs. Mm-hmm. There was an SH4, which I'd never heard of that before.
I've not heard of that either.
Yeah, I think it was like used for for some like a game station at some point in time. It was really, really bizarre. And it was really fun because like there was no way to reverse engineer that.
Yeah.
So at that time, Ghidra was released for the very first time, the NSA reverse engineering tool. So we ended up like writing a plugin for Ghidra to be able to like reverse engineer SH4, which was definitely a lot of fun to do.
Yes, you have a unique perspective on fun. Sounds torturous.
I mean, trust me, like nowadays, all my work is pretty boring. I spend a lot of time on Excel and docs, so like that was a lot of fun for me.
They use a lot of open BMC now. In fact, I started tracing some of this back, like Dell, HP, Lenovo does make some server end stuff, but the larger manufacturers tend to. I think it's IBM and Supermicro use or customize OpenBMC, which is open source, and Dell has their like own kind of thing, is what I imagine. So it's probably not all that dissimilar to 2018. So I don't think that changed too much, right?
At that time, there was not a lot of like OpenBMC. Definitely, Supermicro was doing OpenBMC, but the others, they were not. Keep in mind that we were also looking at sort of like all devices, but that was like what our client had at that time. I think they had like more like 5,000 servers, and there was a lot of like ILO 2 and ILO 4 from HP. There was a lot of, I can recall the models from Lenovo and IBM, which at point they became the same company. And at that time, they were not using OpenBMC. I know that the new stuff they are, but at that time they were not. I just remember like the SH4 Super H was using Dreamcast.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah. Well, in all those, what makes it these waters difficult to navigate from both an offensive and defensive perspective is all of these changed over time. You've got ILO 2, 3, 4. I think they're up to 5 now. You've got Dell that branded it as DRAC and then iDRAC and all that stuff. So they just keep changing as it moves forward. So you look at an environment today and they've got like a sprinkling of everything, and defending that becomes difficult.
Yeah, that was the problem that we had with that client. They have like at least like 8 different models, and on top of the models, there were like different versions of it, right? Like different like firmware version installed. So
right,
and that was sort of like a shame. Of course, we are doing a pay gig, so we have to sort of, you know, when you're doing a pay gig, like you have a limited amount of time, and we have like multiple things to see. And so I think that we spent like 2 weeks per version. So you know, like we didn't have a lot of time to find bugs, to be quite honest. Like between like figuring out how to extract the firmware, reverse engineering, and like to get to the point. And that was a good thing about it, because like the security was so bad that even in these 2 weeks we were able to like get a lot of stuff there.
It's amazing.
I think
there's this like obscure Amazon show called The Feed. Has anyone watched the one The Feed? It's the one where everyone has a chip in their brain that's basically like their smartphone, and so they can see a projection of what we would see on our smartphones, but it's a chip implanted in their brain. And a lot of people are against it, and they try and get it removed. And some people, like, they can't remove it from their brains because it's just so intertwined. That's the BMC inside of your server. Like, it's not just a chip that sits like off band. It's entangled in all of the various buses and inside.
It's a backdoor.
It is.
It's designed to be a backdoor on purpose, kind of.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like the idea behind BMC, and I mean you can also you cannot update it. Like, I mean, there's up to certain versions, and there were others that didn't have any support anymore. And the interesting part from an attacker point of view is that, let's say you compromise a Windows machine, and from the Windows machine you get to the BMC. Now you get to the BMC, and you basically have this like flat network, this out-of-band network that connects all this BMC together, because generally only like some support and infra or IT people have access to that. So there's not a lot of security. It's like generally it's like pretty flat. Forget about like zero trust or any of these like modern strategies that we have nowadays. So at that time, the interesting part is like you get into like a machine, and then from there go to the BMC, and then like you have this like green field where you can like move laterally between BMC and BMC. There's like no way to detect anything here because like this network is not monitored. There's like no way to monitor any activity on the BMCs itself. So you move around, you start compromising different BMCs, and then from the BMCs you can get direct access to the server. So like if you can really get access to that network, is like a massacre, like right away.
Mandy, sorry, you had questions?
Yeah. Well, one goes back to a question that Paul asked about the presentations you were giving. And I wanted to ask, going back to your keynote from, was it CyberCamp? Yeah, CyberCamp in 2016. Where do the elephants go to die?
You know, like I don't remember what I did mention on that presentation. I have to like be honest with you.
I know, like if you played that game with me and you played like the presentation roulette, you'd easily I'd come across and be like, I don't remember giving that.
I think that's the one where you have the Latin phrase bellum omnium contra omnes.
He slept a couple of times since
Nico's
then.
like, I got to go back and watch it. That's some of my talks.
I believe both
that's what I have to do.
English
Like,
and
you know, I don't know if it's the stress or what's going on, but like my long-term memory has been like so
Mine
broken.
too.
And I
Maybe
do remember
it's a
that
pandemic thing. I
it was
don't know.
the title was based on a book. That's the only thing I remember about the presentation. The funny thing about the presentation is like this is a presentation that I prepare a lot for CyberCamp, and I was like very proud of that presentation. I do remember that. And then last minute there was like a speaker that couldn't attend, and they asked me like, can you make another presentation? And I was like, I cannot really do like a presentation out of the blue, right? So, well, I did make it, and I was like, all right, I'll do something, but it's going to be like very like practical. So what I did is like, I basically have no presentation. I was like, I'm going to explain how a Stack Overflow works. So I opened Immunity Debugger, and I took like a very simple example of actual a real I think it's an old like printer server called Niprint. So I basically sat out there and I started explaining that, and I started like calling people in the audience. So, okay, like now you sit there and you have to do this and that, and the person like did that, and then like they go back to the audience. And you know, at the end of the presentation, like we end up like writing a Stack Overflow from the scratch, and everyone was like so happy about the presentation. Everyone was like congratulating me about that presentation. I was like, I didn't prepare this. Like, the keynote is the one that I actually spent a lot of time doing. And
you're like, great. You just helped us write an exploit that we're going to put in Immunity, and we're going to sell the products. It's great. Thanks. It's free research.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we have this visual exploit that we sort of like wrote as a fun thing where like it's a visual language that like you can move boxes around, and that you like move shellcode, and the shell will create this buffer.
Oh yeah. I remember that.
Buffer.
Yes.
And it was so simple. So that was I was like, I'm going to combine that with the debugger and explain how a buffer overflow works. And you know, people enjoy it. Yeah, it was sad because like you know, at the end of it was like I should have done this from the scratch and not like prepare like weeks before the presentation. Anyway.
Mandy, sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. Like I'm going to go back to you because I honestly I can't recall what I said about the presentation.
That's completely fine, because I'm also incredibly interested in hearing your perspective on when you're giving a presentation in both English and Spanish, or what do you personally feel and experience when you're doing it in each language? And part of the reason I'm asking this is I think about friends of mine who perhaps speak numerous languages. I myself spoke French. I didn't really ever speak Spanish, but I had friends that spoke both, and they would say, oh, well, when I pray or I want to do something like reverent, then in Spanish, it's so much easier and it's so much more beautiful. Or if I want to do something technical in English, it's so much easier. And I was curious if that's anything that you experience.
Thank you for asking that question. Like, this is a really interesting question. And I think this is true. Like and I think that a lot of like immigrants will feel the same, is like, you feel like you're yourself when you're speaking your native language, right? Like there was this meme from Modern Family. I can't recall the actor, what you said, like I'm really smart in Spanish, and like people will realize that. And I have the same feeling sometimes because yes, you can see like my English is pretty broken. But if I'm doing a technical presentation, and even having like a technical discussion with like some of my team members, it's really hard to do in Spanish because like you end up like switching constantly to English. And there's things that are really hard to explain in Spanish. I mean, there's obviously a way to do it, but I'm just like been like 20 years, talking about technical things in English, which make it really, really hard to do it in Spanish. I have done a couple of presentations, and again, I keep like switching between Spanish and English, and I sort of like feel bad about it because like people might feel a little bit weird when you're doing that. So I feel more comfortable, even though like obviously English is not my first language, to like keep presentations in English.
Yeah, it's interesting. Going back to the novel that you mentioned, I was looking it up, and it looks like it was never translated into English, and they're talking about why it wasn't translated into English. But I remember my father, who was born and raised in Puerto Rico, he basically just discarded the language as soon as he moved here, and only used it to talk to his family. And I remember when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I think he got a job in he's an engineer, he's a structural civil engineer, and he had to buy a book on like technical engineering language in Spanish. Because that job he had in Puerto Rico required him to write documentation and things like that. And 20 years of not speaking the language, there was all this terminology, this technical terminology that didn't exist. Well, and certainly he wasn't an engineer when he lived in Puerto Rico, so maybe it's that it did exist, but he had never learned that language. So he had this whole dictionary just for technical engineering language in Spanish, and I remember that book hanging around our house.
Yeah, and the reality of it is that there's a lot of words that you cannot really translate, right? Like there's like terms that are related with technology that was created in English and like nobody ever translated. The problem is that when you're speaking in Spanish, you want to like automatically in your mind trying to translate into Spanish, and you cannot really find a word. So like you're speaking and then you're like suddenly freeze because like you're trying to figure out what is the next word that you want to like translate to Spanish, and there's like no way to do that. But there's like technical language is mostly in English. Like there's some attempt to translate it in Spanish, and like the attempts are terrible.
But speaking of other languages, I did have a question from that talk. That Latin that I mentioned, the bellum omnium contra omnes, basically means war of everyone against everyone. And I think you were describing just the state of the internet, where because the public internet, everybody's on it, it's just wide open. Anybody can attack anybody. And I'm curious if you, I don't know if I should say zero trust on this podcast, but do you think we're any closer? Do you think maybe that approach to changing how we architect networks and access to infrastructure and things like that, like you can basically SSH into stuff without ever opening up an SSH port. Has that approach now kind of changed the state that you were talking about in this talk?
Yeah,
of the internet and everybody on it.
And at that time, and now that you're mentioning, I remember a little more. At that time, I was mainly talking about like nations more than like companies and their attackers.
Oh, okay.
But I definitely there has been an improvement in that sense, especially since like with the pandemic and all of that, like everyone went remote, right? So the idea of like protecting, I mean, it was never a good idea to protect your like internal network from external, but the concept has like been around for a long time, and some people still sort of or used to think in those terms. And with COVID, and honestly with like the movement that we have done on SaaS and cloud and all of that, we are at the point where like we're like your machine is your network, right? And I don't gonna talk about zero trust, but that we obviously are living in a world where like your machine is your network. So you have to protect that endpoint and like the trust relationship that has into your computer. So with that, I have definitely seen a huge improvement in that area. Are we better than we were before? In certain ways, we are. Are we more protected? With the with in the last 20 years, with everyone moving into like internet, smartphones, and all of that, at the same time, there has been a lot of like way more criminal activity, right? And so the criminal activity has been mutating into what they are able to achieve. So as we have built better controls, there has been also like more people focused on offensive work for malicious objectives. So yes, we are better, but also like attackers has been like following up with some of this stuff.
Nico, did you always want to be a CISO, or was that something that grew organically?
I was never wanted to be a CISO, to be quite honest. But I do have to say, like, obviously I love offensive for a very long period of time. And then, there was a point where like I was sort of getting bored of it. I'm not gonna lie, like, there's a point where like it could get a little bit repetitive. And I know like a lot of friends will like, will bully me about saying that. But and when I started moving to defensive a little bit, it started with like SEML, which was this like static analysis company that was later acquired by GitHub. Like I started like finding out like very interesting challenges that we have in the defensive world. So maybe not as CISO, but I definitely start finding really good challenges that a lot of like offensive people should definitely move into when they're thinking about like security careers, because especially when you're working at scale, when you're working in a small team, there's a lot of work to be done in automation that are as exciting as writing exploit. And it's sort of a shame, right? Because I'm seeing it in conference, like a lot of like young people are getting into security for the same thing, like pen testing, hacking, CTF, and all of that. But I wish people like to start finding from the early days like other interesting areas that they can sort of like understand and get better and start building their own products. So I'm trying to like do my part and trying to like sort of like send the word. We have done a little bit of that at Echo Party, which is a conference that I'm part of the committee, to try to push the idea of like breaking versus building. Breaking is fine, but building is also like very exciting, and there's a lot of like interesting opportunities in that area. So I'm trying to push a little more of that story, and it's based on my experience, right? Like I have done a lot of like breaking, I have enjoyed a lot, but there's also like a lot of interesting challenges where we're building.
I like static analysis to uncover, like for defenders, basically, to uncover, is there a supply chain issue with the software that I got, or the software that I'm running and I took an update, and I want to use static analysis to tell me if that update was good or bad. I know there's some companies flirting with that or maybe working on it directly, but I think that's really super interesting, because I don't feel like we really solved the supply chain issue. Even like SolarWinds is an example. I still feel like people are like, oh, we'll just detect it after it happens. I'm like, yeah, well, that's too late.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned it, because when I was at GitHub, on top of the responsibility that we have this like POC project that we built in house, where the idea was like we're gonna want to scan a lot of like open source project. We were working on specifically on PyPy. Well, the idea was to start with that. And the idea was like it was so simple to find like malware in like Python dependencies. Like if we start collecting a lot of like samples, and at the end of the day, it was like super basic. There was like base 64, some payload, and then they will like execute that. Like that is how simple it was. Like out of the 100 of samples that we took, 80% of those were as simple as that. And of course, like there's more work that needs to be done. So we put together a POC with the idea of like, eventually GitHub needs to start doing that right? Like trying to get into software repositories. At that time, GitHub, a little bit later after our POCs, bought NPM. And the idea is like, we want to start sort of like building that protection. So when people introduce new vulnerabilities or malware itself, or backdoors into open source code, we were able to detect it. And the idea was like, as part of like a company that is deving, every time you introduce a new version of a software or introduce a new library, you get like a risk profile of that library, right? Like you get like, okay, this is the amount of like vulnerabilities that library had. This is their SLA in patching, or like this is like when like they have like this incident with malware, and provide this like risk scoring capabilities for each of the libraries that you introduce. So developers can look at that and be able to say, okay, is this the right decision for me to do? Or like, given the risk scores, we want to maybe like go for a different library. And of course, like you can do also, as you're doing that, you can also do some like benchmarking, like performance review of the library between versions. That was the idea, to like what changed between last version and this new version. Is there any like potential security risk here, or even performance risk that we want to work on? So like we were working on that idea. Unfortunately, like we were not able to like sell it as much internally, and there's at least two companies I know of that are working in that area, which I find really, really interesting.
Yeah, we need that, because like, you know, someone might in security research download firmware from a Russian website and then download a random Python script without reviewing it to decrypt said firmware. Larry,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Purely hypothetical.
I haven't downloaded any Python to decrypt anything.
That's a true story this week.
Yep. You notice I only copped to half of that, right?
Yep. That's an insight.
Yeah, but I mean, like the supply chain is a big risk, and I think that a lot of companies are suffering from that, and there has not been a really good solution yet for that problem.
Yeah, and Mandy, you had a question that segues into vulnerability management, and it's interesting to start thinking about the relationship between
Speaking of unsolved problems,
right? Supply chain issues, vulnerability management, supply chain EDR, and how those. I'm sure you are thinking about a lot of these things in your day job, Nico. But did you have a comment for Mandy? Had a question? No. Okay.
Sorry, so I missed a question.
No, sorry, there wasn't a question. I'd be looking. You're going to say something. So. All right, Mandy.
No, what I was
go ahead.
What I was going to say is that one of the other thing that we did at GitHub at that time was sort of like POC internally. We have this like really cool, amazing research group. Is like try to figure out like looking at like some of these like big repos that we have in GitHub that has a lot of dependencies. Like try to figure out like who are the people that owns those projects, and sort of like understand like, okay, you know, how much would a person like that sell that project to someone else? How much they will be able to pay, and what would be the consequence of like someone, you know, acquiring that project and suddenly I started adding some code. Right. And when you start like analyzing that, like you figure out like it's super cheap to be able to like own a project and start like inserting malware into that project. And there have been like many attempts to do that.
That's interesting. Mandy, you had a question.
I do, and I want to go back to a write-up from Alex Chantavi, I guess he's a software engineer in security at Lyft, and it's detailing about, this was published in November 2022, and it's a write-up about what was discovered in the 2 years of building a comprehensive vulnerability management program. I mean, a lot of it is very interesting, but I came up with a couple of questions right off the bat. I was wondering first, and come back to this, if you would talk about the positives or benefits that you found in using cartography to go with a graph approach. And then next, because one of the principles, there were 3 principles for our listeners. They said that you try to adhere to 3 key principles: prefer fixing over telling. Next, to prefer automation. And then third, that any guidance the security team provides to the service team must be actionable. Going to the preferring fixing over telling, was that something that you felt was inherent with most engineers that you've been working with, that they come with that mentality, or did it take some work to get the team into that mindset?
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking, because I'm very passionate about that subject. What I would say first is that luckily, at least at Lyft, we have a really fantastic infrastructure team that is really focused on automation and trying to reduce as much as possible friction with developers. So for us, it was almost natural to focus on this problem. Originally, when we started the project, there was like a lot of like attempt from like other team members to sort of like let's create these Jira tickets and have like developers fix some of the problems. And as you know, like with any detection, there's a percentage of like false positives. So I think that this is when we start thinking, all right, like rather than like telling people unless we need to, let's try to make as much as possible a way where we can make that almost automatically for that. So we built a couple of things. We have this internal tool called Refactorator that can like, go and look at code and replace it. So like if you have to change a version of something, that we can go and create an automatic PR on all our repositories, and that will change. And we also have this tool to like do automatic deploy. So with that combination of things, once we like heard about like, for example, library vulnerability, we can ultimately go and create the PR. And if the service team has like auto deploy enable, it will ultimately go and fix it. But I think that one of the things that we were thinking about these like 3 principles, and it's also related with how we see security at Lyft, is the idea of like, every security team in any mid to big size company is not big enough for the company, right? Like there's no way that you can have a security team that you feel like comfortable, like, okay, we are going to be able to like review all the code that we want, and we'll have all the time in the world to do that. Like you're generally running against the clock, right? So, and it's the same with engineers, right? Like engineers are constantly building new features, and they have like some like business metric that they have to reach. So nobody has a lot of time to do things. And so what we believe, and this is one of our biggest principles, is that we have, let's call it like political capital or like trust capital. I think trust capital will work better. We have a trust capital with our engineers. And every time we report something that is not actionable, so they cannot do anything about it, or is a false positive, we lose some of that trust capital. Yep. If we keep like reporting things that are not there or things that they cannot do anything about it, people will start slowly ignore those alerts. And it's similar with like error detection. Like if like my EDR is detecting malware that is not really malware, eventually like you start clicking OK or ignore, and like the user will start ignoring those malware. So we have that concept of like, there's a trust capital that we have with engineers. And every time that we make a mistake, every time we like have like a false positive, we are losing some of that trust capital. And in the future, like depending how we go, like it could be go to the point where like people will stop fixing things, and we'll see in our metrics that people will stop fixing things. So we are really, really focused on like, first of all, reduce as much as possible the friction that we have in engineers. If we can do it ourselves automatically, we will do it. And when we are reporting something, it has to be actionable. It has to be something that they can do, and it's like clear the next step that they have to do. Because otherwise, like we end up with like tickets, or we end up with like people asking a lot of questions, and it's not going to work at scale. So obviously, we are working at scale at Lyft, and so this is sort of like the strategy that we have, and it has been working really, really well. And honestly, with everything we do, like this is sort of like a value that we have, that we use it when we are writing emails to everyone, warning about something that's going on, or when we're doing any implementation. Everything that we do, we have that idea of like, we have a trust capital that we don't want to lose with our teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nico,
first question. Sorry.
Well, what I love what you said already was that like, be really good at fixing stuff. I think is oftentimes what gets missed in the vulnerability management program. We tend to get hung up on, how do I find all the vulnerabilities? How do I prioritize them? How do I communicate them? And just keep iterating on that. Like, we'll just be really good at fixing them, because that's what's most important.
Well, but if
absolutely.
Most of them aren't vulnerabilities, I mean, that's the problem, right? Like, what do you do when all your security tools tell you have 100,000 critical things to fix? Like, I mean, forget it. Nobody has, well, maybe somebody has 100,000 critical things, but where do you start?
Yeah, and there's some interesting companies like doing some work there. For example, there's the people behind SendGrab are doing software composition analysis, and what basically doing is, it's very simple, but it's like, you need to have the resources to start doing that research. But what they do is like, for library dependencies, they go and look where the vulnerability is, and then they just like grab through your code and see if you're actually using the method that like is calling that vulnerability. Because at the end of the day, like sometimes you just like focus on CVEs, but like a CVE could be in a library that you don't really use that part of the code. So they're doing that analysis, and then like you can actually look at your code and say, okay, this you're actually using that method. Like maybe you're not like fully using in the vulnerability or not. Like they might be able to detect that or not. but we know that you're using, so you have to fix that, or we have to like help you fix that for you. And that reduces a lot of like the churn that you have with vulnerability management, because if you're like focused on just CVE or whatever like risks coming from CVE, like you will end up with like millions of vulnerabilities. The other thing that is absolutely important, and you need to find like ways to figure out, is like understand the context in an automatic way. Like what do you know about this, like the service, and based on the context of that, like you can change the risk level of that vulnerability, right? Like you could be high or critical, obviously have some level of SLA in your company. But when you understand, okay, this is a service that like has access to PII or is exposed directly to the internet, or there are other factors that make it more risky, then like you can automatically change the level of a vulnerability based on that, or reduce it, like completely reduce it. It's like under like 3 layers of like security controls, then like there's no need to call this high and maybe it's a low. So that other work around like getting like really good context to be able to like more accurate figure out the criticality of vulnerability is something that is extremely important for vulnerability management.
It's interesting you mentioned SemGrep, because I think it's a burp plugin that is used by the attackers or the pen testers. So as the JavaScript is coming down, they're running it through SemGrep to find vulnerabilities. So like if you're not going to run that, the attackers are going to run that. So you might as well run that.
Yeah, that was a smart plugin. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what if you take it up a layer from vulnerabilities in the code to like the trustworthiness of the code and of the libraries itself? Like earlier, you were talking about people, just taking over open source projects and things like that. I think that's what you're saying, where it's remarkably easy to just buy into like a plugin or a library or something like that, and then turn it into something nasty. How do we solve that? Like the NPM problem. We like to call it. We're always seeing something else. Somebody threw a new NPM library in there. It's hoping to typo squat somebody.
Yeah, I mean, like there are some tools that are sort of like trying to do like typo squatting detection. One of the interesting things that I have seen is like GitHub have been like doing a really good work in the way that they're now like forcing developers that own like very popular libraries and software to use MFA. I mean, it's simple, but it has a lot of value out of that. And I know that there's some other companies that are doing sort of like threat intelligence on author itself. It's a little bit controversial, and I have not seen the results of that work. But when you're like seeing like weird behavior coming from a like well-known contributor, or like suddenly there's like a new contributor that is like doing some sort of like anti-patterns in the code, you sort of like get alerted. I don't know how that working. I just heard about that coming up from one of those companies that are focusing on supply chain. But at the end of the day, like there's not an easy solution for that. There's definitely not an easy solution for that.
So we're gonna dox the maintainer to find out if the library's trustworthy, like that kind of violate their privacy to. Well,
I think it's that way. It's
really
more about
tough.
like the behavior that got on your repo, right? Like you're not going to go all the way to like see like, oh, let me look at the bank statement and see if they have been bribed recently or anything along those lines. More about like the behavior that they have on GitHub. And again, like I'm not even against that idea or in favor of it. It's just like things that I have heard that people are trying to see like if that could help solve some of this problem.
Yeah, could you imagine like some of that stuff comes out? The maintainer of that library donated to this political party, so clearly you need to stop using that library, right?
Yeah, that would be like I'm a really bad.
Yeah, someone hacked into their.
I don't want to be part of that internet.
Someone hacked in their Ring doorbell, and like Russians were seen dropping off big duffel bags full of money. That's bad.
I mean, for who?
Yeah,
exactly.
But that's the I do worry about that, right? Because when we think about protecting government secrets, and one of the reasons we have clearance is to like prevent against that threat, which obviously doesn't work 100% because there's all kinds of books and movies and stories, about that happening. But how do we trust the people that are creating software that's in our supply chain, that especially for open source? Because like one of the podcasts I was listening to, I think it was Josh and Kurt at Open Source Security Podcast, and I think it was someone they were interviewing said like, there's two people maintaining like the time zone code for like all the Linux stuff. There's two people, and they just do it because like that's their thing, and it's actually super complicated, but like that's their thing, and they do it. But in the context of also what we're talking about is like, are you going to put restrictions on them and force them to do things to protect, the greater good? They're just like, no, we do this because we like it. We're going to do the best job that we can at it, but don't start making it not fun for us, because then someone else is going to have to maintain that. Believe me, none of us want to do that. Right? Like these guys are. I don't know. Go ahead, Nico.
There's some good stories about the one of the curl. I think the one only curl maintainer with curl is like extremely used across.
It's funny you say
everything.
That. I have a story because curl, his 8.0 was released recently, and it was like some anniversary, and I counted. There's 250 command line switches for curl, and I would not want to be responsible for that code just from general code maintenance, and I certainly wouldn't want to be responsible from a security, because that's all user data that you.
Nobody else is going to want to take that on.
No,
nobody else is going to want to pick that up.
And a couple of weeks ago, we had a story that we didn't cover that the folk that maintain curl. I almost said folks. The folk that maintain curl also believe that the folks that define the CVSS scores are completely bullshit, and that they maintain their own scoring system because the CVSS ones are completely random. Like,
I can't blame them.
I know.
Yeah,
I know. But
and the funny thing is like nobody's contributing. Like this is one maintainer that is like maintaining this like amazing project, and nobody's paying anything to him. Like there's like only a small amount of like really contributors that are putting like some money into that, but like this is how we actually, I think, in certain ways fix the supply chain problem, right? Like we need to find ways where we are like helping those people like make a living out of these projects that we all depending on.
Yeah.
A massively used tool and or set of libraries maintained by a very small number of folks. That's how you get Log4j.
Yes.
There are, though, aren't there? I know I've seen some projects to both financially fund some of these folks that are maintaining these things, and some organizations that have devoted like a certain amount of money or resources to help them do that. In fact, I remember the EU a couple of years ago earmarked a couple $1 million just to improve like a handful of really critical open source projects to do like bug bounties, high profile bug bounties for them to help them out.
Yeah, the OpenSSF under the Linux Foundation as an organization that is working on that, and they have like some funding, and they're working on trying to help like maintainers, and we also have, I think that they were planning to have like their own engineers to work on some of these critical projects to find vulnerabilities and also help them fix. Because I think at the end of the day, I think that they did a survey at that time. Yeah. The OpenSSF was something that we built when we were at GitHub with other companies, but we have this idea of like, we need to, we have so many companies that care about open source security, and they're doing their own thing. So we put together this like coalition of companies at that time to get everyone together under the same roof, very neutral roof, because we have like all the like big ones in there, and start thinking about like how we can all together can contribute to open source security. And I think that, and then this evolved into the OpenSSF that is currently under the Linux Foundation. But one of the things that I think they were planning to do, I haven't like catch up with them, but the idea of like hiring engineers that can work in multiple projects to like not only find bugs but also fix them, because I think that one of the big problems that maintainers had is like some of them need money, some of them didn't really need money. They need like contributors to help them like work in some of these problems. And I think that was like the organization figured it out and would start thinking about like funding engineers to help with these projects.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what they need. They don't need extra people to add issues to their GitHub. You know, like, congrats, you got 2,000 new issues on your GitHub project, but you're still one person. Like they need people to actually write the code and actually fix that stuff.
To be amazing at fixing things, yeah.
Yeah, and blame it on us. Like, I mean, especially on offensive people that, like, you know, they go and invite it to a project and they find bugs. I mean, this is definitely useful, but then they're like every 2 days they're like, hey, have you fixed that? Have you fixed that? Like, I report that like 2 weeks ago. And on the other side, you have these like software engineer that has like a 9 to 5 job, and then like in the afternoon he start working on this project that is use it, and nobody is funding, and like people get really really mad about security people for those reasons, because like we're pushing to fix problem because for them the security problem is like the most important thing in the world, and the maintainer has like so many other responsibilities.
Nico, are you presenting or anything like that today?
What do you mean presenting?
Or like going to conferences and presenting or anything like that?
Honestly, with like the amount of stress that I already had in my role, I decided like I don't need any extra stress, so I'm not doing anything. I mean, I'm here in the podcast because I really like what you folks are doing, but I try to avoid as much as possible any like conference or public appearance because stress me out a little bit.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the show, Nico, and for fighting the good fight as a defender now, which is spending all that time on offense now. I think rightfully so. Applying those skills to defense is amazing. I just have 5 questions left for you, Nico. You ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure.
3 words to describe yourself.
Curious, enthusiastic, and stressed.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Good question. I would say my arms, because I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Nice.
Ooh.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
I would say Where the Elephants Goes to Die, just because we.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Can I say 2 movies?
Sure.
Hackers, because I hated it at the beginning, but I love it as I grow up. And then The Listening. I love The Listening too.
What's that? What was the second one?
The Listening.
What is The Listening?
Oh, you should go and say it.
Oh, now I haven't heard of that.
To the Google.
What is the country of origin of The Listening?
It's a U.S.
Is it a U.S. movie? Really interesting.
Yeah, it's about the like an NSA.
Awesome.
It's someone that suddenly is able to like listen to every phone call. Actually, like, open the microphone on a phone and be able to like listen. And it's someone that is like trouble about that capability the NSA had.
That's awesome. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Live, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh, God damn it. I'm not really into public figures. I would say because we just won the World Cup, my father should be Messi.
Nice.
And then since we're talking about hacking, I would say Angelina Jolie will be my mother.
Love it. Nico, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
That was some weird questions. All right. Thank you so much, folks. Have a good time.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back with the security news. Stay tuned.